So you want to say things now?
Yeah, sure. So thank you everyone who did join us. Hopefully trying to increase access with the Zoom options and the recording being available after the fact. But it's always nice to gather in person when we can, with food, and obviously doing some wonderful content for JJ. Very happy to have her back. I will let her take the floor and run you through today, but I think we all can agree we have varying degrees of stress in our lives, and we all could use a little boost every now and then as far as management strategies and recognizing our stressors and maybe how to find a little bit more resiliency within ourselves. So without further ado.
Thank you, staff, and hello to everyone if you're on the other side of this camera, and to Shadir for doing this today. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Shadir for doing the video, and thanks for all of you for coming. So yeah, today's topic is real-time resilience, managing challenges with daily lives. For the people on the screen, I can get you a PDF copy of this. But I think I'm going to start with, even before I introduce myself, is I'm just really curious why you came today. I know part of it is the free lunch. That's okay. That's your answer. But I'm going to kind of, do you want to share what intrigued them to come today to learn about this topic?
I'm relatively resilient, but I see a lack of resilience in my students and my own children. That demographic. I'm not really sure why and how to encourage it, you know. So that's something I want.
Sure. Anyone else here?
I think it's twofold. Number one, any strategies that I can share with my athletes, kind of add to my coaching toolbox. But personally, I'm a very meticulous planner. So kind of seeing something, wrench in the plans, and then I got to pivot. I have a tendency to just freeze up.
Sure.
So anything to kind of help me be more pliable there.
Bendable. Thank you. Anyone over here?
Well, I think that people view, that I view myself as more resilient than some of the people in my life. So I think I need to look at that and think about it. I think I'm doing, not being anxious or over worrying, but then I hear from people in my life that, gosh, can you calm down? So I think I need to.
Don't you love that one? Can you calm down?
Yeah, thank you. As if I want to be anxious. Yeah.
That's what I did. Yeah, I was like, of course I want to be. I like that, especially in the actual clinical anxious state. Just calm down. Well, if I could do that, it was.
For me, many others here, just try to get those tools and manage. Be calm in situations, having discussions, and go into something, feeling biased or not. You stressed out about it.
Sure.
Don't like having difficult discussions, so
Yeah.
tools, calm down.
Sure. Definitely. Sure. I'm glad you're all here, and I think it's also just really important to even have conversations about worry, overwhelm, stress, resilience, all these kind of key topics, even to just say it out loud, like, hey, I notice I do X, or this group of people I'm trying to support does Y, and there's a lot of overwhelm involved, and all the things, just having those general conversations can be really helpful. Hello to all of you in the back. Welcome. Help yourself to some food. We're just getting started. There are some worksheets. You want to give those to your friends?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I even think just starting with just having a discussion about this kind of stuff. There's not a lot of forums and places unless you're clinically seeking out support for an anxiety disorder or something like that, where we can have these discussions. Maybe certain places, certain friends, certain rooms, but I love to bring these discussions to organizations. I'll tell you a little bit about me. So we're going to talk today about, it's an actual strategy called real-time resilience. So we're going to learn a tool, one that you can use, one that you can share. We're also going to just talk a little bit about resilience in general and how we are as a species. My name is Jamie, or JJ I go by, and this I was just mentioning, I've probably come up here for about 4 years now, doing different topics and talks in what I study, which is the science of positive psychology. Is anyone here familiar with that field? Someone in the back. So I love when people actually aren't, and no offense, I love that you know it as well, but I love to introduce people to the field of positive psychology. That's really what I do. I'm a positive psychology practitioner. I'm a one-on-one coach, I'm a trainer, I'm a speaker, I'm a consultant. I also just recently opened up a physical space in Syracuse where I have products, services, and events to support mind and body well-being. And sort of a full load of different ways that I share this science, but it's really a scientific field of study. And so I want to tell you a little bit about it. I always practice these talks and sharing what this is. So positive psychology is a field of psychology. So just as we have behavioral or cognitive or social or developmental, positive psychology is a field of psychology that started in the late 1990s. It was predominantly started out of the University of Pennsylvania with a man named Martin Seligman. He was the president of the American Psychological Association at the time. And he recognized that we had become really well versed at diagnosing, treating, categorizing, and actually what can go wrong. And really looking at an illness model, similar to a lot of our medical models where we're really focused on treating illness. But the problem was, this is absolutely needed in the pursuit that we need to work with, working with mental illness, working through trauma. But what was happening is just because you were no longer, let's say, depressed, let's say you had a diagnosis of depression, and you were able to successfully treat that depression, it doesn't mean you're happy and flourishing and thriving, it just means you're not depressed. And so we got really good at getting people to neutral, but we weren't studying how do we get people north of neutral, how do we continue up that spectrum of flourishing. So some people call it the scientific study of well-being, the scientific study of human flourishing. It's also very much the study of resilience. How do we build tools that don't excel of neutral and need clinical support? And you also can be working with both. So lots of clinical psychologists are learning positive psychology interventions or working in tandem with coaches or facilitators that teach these tools. But it really is, I like thinking of it as, some people call it the science of what makes life worth living, or showing up the way you want to. It's like, how do we live the way we want to every day? How do we feel good? How do we feel well? So we're talking about resilience today. So I'd love you to step into your own little reflection on your personal resilience narrative. So I want you to think of a really challenging situation that you've been through in life. I'm sure every single one of us has been through a myriad of challenging situations. Challenge is relative to all of us. So something that felt really hard to you might not feel really hard to your neighbor. But we've all experienced challenge. So I want you to think back of a challenge and one that you feel like is kind of in a bit of your hindsight. Like, yeah, I made it through that period. I was able to handle that the way I was supposed to, or even just get through it. Maybe looking back and learn ways to handle it. So I'm curious, what are some of the words that come up for you when you think of your resilience or your challenges that you've been through? Any type of thoughts that come up, like, you know, I don't know if you have a little mantra that maybe you use when times are hard.
Patience.
Patience, that's part of your resilience narrative. Time heals. Anyone else? Yeah.
I use repeatedly, every problem has a solution. Yeah, it might not be the optimal one at that time.
Yeah.
It's something to get us across that line.
Yeah. Every problem has a solution. Anyone else have a little mantra or something they kind of tap into? Yeah.
Mine is it's a Bruce Lee quote. It's "Be water, my friend." About just fluidity.
Yeah, rolling that, moving with the ebbs and flows and some of that. Anything else?
Support, like not being afraid to ask others to like, hey, you know, I could really use a little help in this scenario type thing.
I actually do one of the biggest topics in positive psychology is around relationships. And I actually always say that relationships equal resilience, that it's those support systems that are stronger. Anything else I'm missing? So when it comes to this word resilience, it's a big word. It's our ability to bounce back and handle challenges and adversities. I like the definition of resilience as struggling well, that we're all going to struggle. We can learn to struggle well and know that what's going to happen. The thing is, we're already really resilient. Humans are a resilient species. And I like to remember kind of one of my mantras, and one of the things that makes me feel really strong is that everyone here has handled 100% of everything that's ever happened to them. You all have 100% track record of handling everything. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way you wanted to, but you made it through it, and it's not that we're fearing what we'll do, I think we have this general innate fear that we're just not gonna make it through this hard time. I'm just not, I'm not gonna make it, every one of you has made it through everything and is sitting here today. I'm sure every one of you also has still things you're working through, that some of your struggles that you're going through, you'll have new ones, things will change. But one of the things I like to remember is we have made it through everything that's ever happened to us. And we can still learn new ways to be more resilient and to think a little different, to be a little different, to live a little different. And resilience, just like well-being, I kind of think of them as the same thing. Often the strategies that make us well make us resilient. So a lot of the things I teach when I'm saying, well, these are strategies for well-being or also strategies for resilience, they kind of go hand in hand, but it's also, it's like our happiness. It's as individual as the fingerprint. So some things work for some people some of the time. So I like to have as many strategies in my box as I can. It's kind of like if you're gonna go hike a mountain, you might need those ice picks at certain points, or the clamp-ons, or the a power bar. You know, you're gonna need a poncho. I don't know. You're gonna need different things at different times. So I think anything that we can learn, and even just there's one little thing you grasp onto from today. I was kind of sharing this talk with someone earlier, talking about what I was going to talk about, and he said, wow, that concept of just, I've handled everything that's ever gone through in life really struck me. And I said, well, if that's all you needed from today, then, you know, who I'm talking to, so maybe, you know, you eat your lunch and that's good, you'll take that. But I do think for me, that's one of my narratives, is I've handled everything. And I always also say, one of the favorite things I love to say is, in this moment, I am okay. In this moment, I am okay. There might be a harder moment later, there might be something that happens, and we like to project and ruminate into the future. We like to look back at the past, but in the present moment, everyone, we're all okay in this moment. So I like to also breathe into kind of that much. So again, positive psychology, not only being this idea of how do we move and flourish up the spectrum, but how do we also almost like preventative medicine, learn tools so that we don't necessarily become clinically anxious or clinically depressed. And I apologize, some of the slide formatting is just because when I plug into Steph's computer, it's a little bit wonky, but hopefully you can see everything on here. So a lot of the work in resilience, especially in the field of positive psychology, comes from Dr. Stanivich. She's worked with the military, war preparation. She's a professor at UPenn and the director of resilience at their training, public psychology and training programs. And she's led, again, professional sports teams, all sorts of programs she's written books. And so the tool that we're going to learn today comes from her work, where she pulls together some different resources. And what this is today, we're going to work on, because there's lots of tools for resilience. There's going and sweating it out on the treadmill. That's going to make us our nervous system stronger, all sorts of good brain chemicals. It's going to physically make us fitter. There could be sitting practices where we're meditating and allowing our mind chatter and that prefrontal cortex to kind of slow down and get into that transient type of frontality. We could have tools with relationships. There's a million things we can do for resilience. This is one tool, but I think it's a cool one. And it's one to work with our thoughts, because everything kind of stems from that thought level for us. Our thoughts lead to our behaviors and our beliefs. Our thoughts lead to even the chemicals that we're producing in our bodies. So if we're having anxious thoughts, our heart's going to beat faster. We're going to have more stress hormones pumping through us. So if we can work with our thoughts, it's going to affect our beliefs, our actions, our physiology, our actions. If we can start to work with our thoughts. And so this tool holds research from Aaron Beck, David Burns, and Martin Seligman, and it allows us to work with thoughts as they come up, because we're just constantly thinking thoughts. And they keep coming. I want to say there's something along the lines of upwards, and you can do the math, because there's a lot of thought. It's like 50,000 unique ones every day at the high end. So we're constantly churning up there. So if we can start to, one, be more conscious of our thoughts. So question, how many times do you sit around and think about the thoughts that you're thinking? Or stop and think about your thoughts? Do you often stop to think about what you're thinking about? Anyone? Yes? Yeah?
I have a long drive, so I do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's good to start catching our thoughts. I always think like, wow, we're kind of this one room audience, like an audience of one. Oddly, it's kind of like we're having thoughts, but we're also witnessing them. So if we can kind of be that witness and be a little more conscious instead of just walking through our day and allowing the thoughts. If our thoughts lead to our beliefs, our actions, our behaviors, our physiology, maybe we want to stop for a minute and just like, interesting. Does that thought really help me? And so that's really what this is a tool to help us work with our thoughts. And again, so I'm saying our thoughts drive our beliefs, our behaviors, our emotions, our physiology, and then it's kind of like this loop. So then our emotions start to feed our thoughts, and our thoughts feed our emotions. Our physiology, it's a little, oh, I feel nervous, my heart's pounding, then it starts to feed our thoughts. It's kind of like we're this whole system, but if we can work at the thought level, it can be really powerful.
Isn't this where overthinking it comes into play like?
Yes, and actually, we're gonna talk about it. Yes, so you don't want to think so much that you're not able to be present and conscious and calm. But we also, at default, we're wired with a negativity. So the weight of the bad feels stronger than the weight of, like the bad of the bad feels stronger than the good of the good, which was protected. We needed to not have bad theories or fall off cliffs or get chased by tigers. But what happens now is the bad thoughts, the ruminating thoughts win. And so if we're not conscious enough to catch those, in default, we're gonna spiral down anyway. We're gonna go into those negative thoughts. So this is a way to start catching them, kind of seeing where we fall, like our patterns, and working with them. But we're also gonna talk about overthinking, because that's the catastrophizing piece where you start with a small thing, and it spirals down that hill into nothing, which is not quite rational. It's like this rational thought leads to this really irrational. So I want you to step into a recent challenge or adversity that you've been in where you had a lot of mind check. So something maybe professionally, personally, physically, any personal relationship. And I want you to think of some of the mind chatter. So you can flip your paper over. Here's an example. I actually wrote this talk right in the middle of COVID. And well, we're still in, I don't know if we're in anymore. But right in the heart of home when the kids all had to go home from school. And so here's an example of the type of mind chatter I had at that time. I learned that my kids were all going to be going to distance learning. And I thought things like, I'll never be able to balance homeschool and work. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to teach my son at the time was first grade. Like I don't know how to teach him language, writing skills. This is going to be horrible. My kids are going to hate this, and my kids are going to get so far behind and never catch it up and just be on this track. So these are some of the thoughts. I'm going to give you a second to just write down some mind chatter that came up for you during this recent struggle. So what has been identified is that under stress or overwhelm, we often fall into what are called thinking traps, which are just habitual ways of thinking that include counterproductive thoughts. And they make it hard for us to accurately problem solve and undercut our ability to quickly bounce back. The thing I mentioned, that negativity bias, the thing about this negativity bias, and when we get into these ruminating thoughts and this mind chatter, is that when we're in a negative state, and I say negative because I don't think emotions are bad or good, it's just some emotions are more comfortable. When we're in a negative state and kind of that, this is so hard, that kind of stuck space, we're narrowed. And when we're in a positive state, we're broadened and we can see more opportunity and possibility around us. And so literally in a positive state, rather than a negative, neutral, or stress state, we can see our peripheral vision works better. We literally see more options. And we're more creative and flexible, can actually think better to get ourselves out of these things. So if we can kind of work with these thoughts that are getting us into this negative space, it can be really helpful. So I'm gonna go through some traps that we all get into. You might recognize some that you often fall into, and we'll do them one at a time. So there's 5 main thinking traps. There's actually a pretty exhaustive list of thinking traps, but I'm gonna focus on these top 5 thinking traps that we often get into. The first one is mind reading. So we often think we know what other people are thinking, or we think other people know, they know what we're thinking. So you assume you know what the other person is thinking, it's usually negative, and it leads to blocked communication, it can impact relationships. So when I said, my kids are gonna hate us, did I ask them? I just assumed. And so we often assume maybe we're having a struggle with a boss or a partner, and we think we know what they're thinking, or we think they know what we're thinking. Maybe someone crossed a boundary, but we didn't actually set a boundary, we just assumed they know that we had a boundary. So it can block communication, it can impact relationships, and that was an example of one of my thoughts where I thought they're gonna hate us. The next one is the me trap. A lot of people that are quite self-critical, sometimes people that are often achievers, and when anything goes wrong, it's the me trap. They're not enough, they did something. It can lead to guilt, isolation. Yeah, sorry, this is like a little bit offset from my slide, so the little guys or gal is on top of this, but leads to guilt, isolation, feelings of sadness. So when I said I'm not cut out for this, I put all the blame on me in that thought. I'm just not going to be able to make this work. I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. And often have some of the language. The next one is the opposite of the me trap. It's the them trap. It's everyone else is responsible. There's nothing I can do about it. It's this person. It's this boss's management style. It's this other person's actions, the hard person. It leads to anger, resentment, aggression, frustration with other people. And in that example of my kids will never be able to handle this, I'm putting the blame on them. So you can see how different thoughts fall into some of these different traps. The next one is a pretty popular one. People tend to, like, oh yeah, I know this. Catastrophizing, that's the Chicken Little, the sky's falling. This is where what happens with catastrophizing is we often start with a really rational thought. So the thought might be something like, I'm not going to get this presentation done in time. Okay, that's rational. But what then happens is, and then they're never going to hire me back to Hamilton to come do this talk, talks again. And then no one else, they're going to hear about me and say at Hamilton that I don't show up on time, I'll get my material done, and no one else is going to hire me. And then I'm going to not have enough money to pay my mortgage, and then, and we do that so quick that rational thought of I'm not going to get this done in time seems just as likely as I'm gonna lose my house, because it happens so fast, and that initial thought is rational. If I'm up at midnight trying to present and get ready for a presentation and it's not done, that's a rational worry. But the whole snowball that just happened in the blink of an eye makes me think like that last thought is just equally as likely as the first thought. And so this makes us anxious. And it leaves out our ability to think clearly, to problem solve. This is where we start to get into that like physical worry. You know, you call someone and they don't answer, and I'm a parent, so this is a good, I think parents love to catastrophize. You can't get a hold of your child, the whole snowball of, oh, this horrible thing probably happened. You get physically have the symptoms, so this is like, my kids are never, they're gonna get behind in homeschooling, and they're never gonna get into it. Eventually, it's like they're never going to college, it's like he's in first grade. But, that thought happens really, really fast. So this is a very classic thing that happens for us. And again, if you remember that negativity bias, it makes sense why we look to that a lot. And then the last trap, sometimes the catastrophizing actually leads to this trap, I think. But it's its own trap. It's that helpless feeling when we just feel stuck. I don't like this option, I don't like this option, but we can't see that there is 1,000 other options in the middle. We just feel stuck. There's nothing we can do. This is global, this is how it always is, this is how I am. Some of our pessimistic thinking style often leads to that. When it comes to optimism and pessimism, they're actually thinking styles. We can work on them. A lot of it leads, and really leads to apathy, hopelessness, helplessness, feeling stuck, lack of motivation, when we just stop trying. So if I said this is horrible, there's nothing I can do about this, I think I'm stuck, this homeschooling thing is gonna be horrible, then I stop trying to change. And that's kind of, hope is the catalyst for change. If we have no hope, we don't try things, we don't try solutions. And so when you get stuck in that helplessness trap of there's nothing I can do about this, it's never gonna change, then you stop trying to change it, it doesn't change because we believe it won't. All right, so can you look back at your thoughts, I'm curious, and map any of those traps? I'll go back to this initial. Can you map any of those thoughts to any of these traps? Do any of them fall into like, is there all a certain type? Is there a mix in them? So I'll give you a second just to kind of see if any of those map to that. And I'd love to hear from anyone, what's coming up, or are you noticing any of these patterns in, you're seeing any of these in your list? Yeah.
Very weird. So for me, just for having that's especially colleagues.
Yeah.
Mind reading.
Yeah.
Communicating that exercise. It's not through.
Yeah. I'm sitting here right now looking around like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're doing.
I think for me, the mind reading and then the me are like connected because I'm almost always convinced that what I'm reading in their mind is that they hate me, I've done something wrong, like somehow I am responsible for all the ways this is not going right.
Yeah. Yes, these can play together like that. And yeah, how often do we, and again, that negativity bias at play, you're not sitting there going, I know they love me. I know, like thinking about the best thing that they think about you, like, oh, she must think that I look crazy. Like, I bet you she loves my, or we sit there and we go right to what we think we're doing wrong, what we think the other person thinks of us. It's such a natural state that we get into. Which one, I hope with anything, this also just gives you a little bit of self-compassion, that this is how we're wired with that negativity bias to fall into these. And, oh, other people get into these traps. Did anyone else notice one that they fall into a lot, just in general or on? Yeah.
I think on the list with what I was looking at specifically, it was actually like a tie between catastrophizing and helplessness. But then like I was thinking about something I did this weekend and it was totally just a stupid mind reading thing.
Yeah.
I like stressed myself out for 10 minutes trying to figure out how to answer this one text message and it turned out to be like totally benign.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my God, he's mad. Oh, this shouldn't be happening.
How
And it's
often,
just a
this is a
question.
great point, Seth. How often do we mind read, think something, and when we finally like are brave or calm enough, or whatever, to ask them, they're like, yeah, no, I don't know what you're talking about, or I'm not mad, or I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always kind of go to that worst case scenario. We don't, again, we easily catastrophize and go to the worst case. So how quickly we can worry down that path to the worst scenario. We don't do the opposite. We're not like, oh, and then money could fall out of the sky, and then Oprah's gonna show up, and then, like, we don't do that. Our brains don't go that way. We just go the opposite, And so if we can get a little more accurate, this is really what this is also helping us do. It's not trying to just blindly make us more optimistic and say, oh, I don't have to worry about these thoughts. It's actually, most of these thoughts are very inaccurate. And that's what we're gonna look at. A lot of these things, I'll never get through this. That's just pure, we got through everything. A lot of the mind reading, especially, we have no idea what's going to about us. And they have no idea what we're doing. So, anything else coming up for anyone? Yeah.
Well, a lot of these, I think, for me, is precedent. In the past, this happened. So
Sure,
I expect this to happen.
right. Did
So
you do all the same, just
So,
because you
especially at catastrophes,
yeah.
this happened before, so, there's a really good chance it's gonna happen again.
Okay,
That's-
and sometimes that's true. And I won't say, like, we have data, we look back, there's patterns, we have patterns in ourselves. And
Especially with kids.
with kids.
Yeah.
And the only thing constant is change. We're all changing. The situation's changing, our physiology is changing. I love the saying, so man is the actual thing, that's what they say, but the same person never steps in the same river, because it's not the same river and it's not the same person. It's like everything's always changing. So yes, we want to have some data. That's what makes us comfortable enough to predict, I'm gonna walk out the door and something's not gonna fall on my head, because every time I've walked out that door, nothing's fallen on my head. So I feel safe to do it. And when it comes to people's behaviors and actions, they can change. But often we do need to have the conversation with someone, just like we're just assuming that this is going to happen, or we're assuming they're gonna cross that boundary again. Maybe we didn't set it, or, there's a lot of situations, but precedent is a tricky one. Because yes, we are kind of patterned and we do things over again, but it doesn't mean things can't change or people can't change. We want to give ourselves the grace to change, so I often try to give people around me that grace as well. All right, we'll go back through these.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
I guess I'm thinking like, how do you set a boundary if if someone else is imposing one of these like traps? Like if for example, scenario where someone asks me, oh, what do you think that they're thinking? I don't know, you'll have to ask them. So that's a boundary, right? But I kind of know, I'm not sure, but I don't know how to articulate what I'm
Yeah,
in a
try to
scenario
follow.
like that.
Yeah.
If a colleague is like, oh, what do you think that this other colleague is thinking? It's like, oh, I genuinely don't know, you'll have to ask them.
Yeah, I think that, and I think the boundary you're setting is that's not my place to say that.
Yeah.
So boundaries are kind of twofold. There's external boundaries where we're communicating it to somebody else and saying, hey, I put this note on the door that says I need peace in my office from this time, please don't come in the door, instead of just closing your door and thinking someone's gonna walk. People will walk in unless you set it like a boundary. Boundaries are also internal. So there's things that you can say to yourself that are, when someone asks me something that's not my place to say, I will internally set a boundary that I'm not going to answer that. So I think it's so situational, it's so dependent, but I think it's really exercising what you feel is right in those moments. Obviously in a work setting, that'd be a little more challenging because the people in authority are sometimes setting the precedences or the boundaries and you're following them. But I think there are ways that the more you kind of see the way you think, or even just assuming that if you say something, maybe some of the mind reading stuff in there, yeah, it's it's a kind of sticky situation, but yeah, I think boundaries have to be internal and external. Maybe that's a little helpful to me. All right, so you might notice that there's a trap you often fall into kind of globally in others, but then you also might notice that sometimes you fall into certain traps in certain situations. So maybe with kids, you catastrophize. With a husband, a wife, a partner, maybe it's an I'm trap all the time. You're noticing, oh, I'm always focused on what they're doing to make the situation hard. Maybe at work, it's a lot of mind reading, like we just said, we're often like, this person makes performance, or sitting here, I always am kind of scanning the rooms, are they engaged, do they think this is helpful, am I talking too much, you know, we're always mind reading kind of at a general level, but I think especially in the workplace. All right, but the good news is, so we recognize that we fall into these traps, that we have this bias, is that we can start to learn to catch these. And the more we start to catch thoughts like this, the easier they are to work with. So at first, it's kind of clunky. We're not used to maybe stopping and pausing and thinking about the way we handle these situations, or in our mind chatter. But the more we do this, the more you start to recognize patterns. And I think even just the awareness that, yeah, I'm not going to catastrophize can help us start to work with that process. Or, oh, I'm often a me trap where I always put this blame on myself. But there's 3 strategies that you can work with. My suggestion is to try to find the one that feels authentic. The more authentic, the better. We don't want to just blindly be like, oh, I can get through this. Lean portion thinking. So if any of this feels a little too contrived, try a different one. So I'll give you some examples. Again, I apologize about pictures. So the first one is to look back with evidence. Now we talked about how this can kind of work the other way, because if the precedence is for something, maybe we're going to still get a little bit stuck in there. But when you have a counterproductive thought, can you kind of take that to court in a way? Like, is that even true? You know, if I say something like, I'm never going to get through this, is that even true? I've gotten through everything. You know, I'm terrible at blah, blah, blah. Is that true? Maybe it's not my best quality. Maybe I need a little more practice. You know, generally, a lot of times, again, with that negativity bias, our thoughts are very skewed. We have like zillion biases that we have that we're working through. So often our thoughts are just not true. So in a way, every one of these strategies has a sentence starter. And a little thing you can put in your pocket. You can write these they're on your sheet, but you can kind of keep these 3 little sentence starters and take them with you. So when you start to recognize those thoughts going amok, that's not true because, so that's what that sentence starter says. It says, that's not true because blank. Is there anything on your list where you look at that and you're like, well, that's not really exactly true because maybe there's something on there that would work with. So, this helps you kind of crowd out some of those unhelpful that, you know, where you're just, it gives you a different way to think about it. The next one is a reframe. We can reframe anything that we want. Sometimes we want it to be wedded to reality, but we can reframe anything. And this brings in our ability to have optimistic thinking, which helps open us up and put us in a different space. And so a more helpful way to see this could be another sentence starter. So if I'm saying that I'm going to never get through homeschooling, this is going to be horrible, a more helpful way to see this is, yeah, this can be challenging, and maybe if I come at this with curiosity, this might be an interesting experience with my kids. Maybe I'll get a little more time with them. Maybe this will give them the ability to breathe a little, feel so rushed in the day to day. So a more helpful way to see this is, and the next one, which I think I come to this one a lot, and I think it's because sometimes I don't feel like there's a more helpful way to see this. I can't find it, you know, I'm really stuck. Or maybe it is true. Maybe all the data looking back on my thing is like, yeah, this is the data I've seen. So this is a contingency plan. Because generally what happens is we just wanna know that we can get through it again. So if X happens, I will Y. So I could say something like, if I get a few weeks in the homes, my kids are depressed and miserable and nobody's getting through anything, then I will do this. I will reach out for support. I will do something. And this contingency plan just allows us to breathe, knowing that we will handle it. So if, I don't know, I'm trying to think of any other examples, but if I get to this point where it's just so sticky and I can't seem to get through it, I will reach out for a resource, I will call a friend, I will do this. And it helps bring us out of that catastrophizing rumination. So, can you look at your thoughts and use any of these? And again, you wanna make it authentic, you wanna make it feel right. So that's not true because a more helpful way to see, and I'm gonna give you a minute to kind of work through this. A more helpful way to see this is where if X happens, I will Y. Now, given this may have been a struggle or a challenge that you've already worked through, it's in the past, and you don't have to worry about a contingency plan, but maybe looking back at a way I could have looked at this in that period of time. And if you're feeling stuck on any of them, feel free to raise your hands. That'll help. Here it is. It doesn't, I don't want anyone to share anything that feels too vulnerable, too personal, but does anyone have a thought that they started with and a new thought that they would need to come with that they'd be willing to share, maybe that doesn't give away too much of the experience? And if not, that's fine. This feels very personal and like something you're working through on your own, but it's just always nice to hear other people kind of give voice to something they've.
The situation kind of unfolded over email through somebody that I hadn't ever met in person. And
Okay.
so the start of it was like, oh my gosh, she's so impersonal, she's unhelpful, I'm never going to like get what I need, I'm never going to get the answers, you know.
Yeah.
And then the more helpful thought would be, she's really busy, she actually has multiple jobs, she's very informative and thorough in her emails and just not very relationally warm, and like that can be okay. And
Yeah.
did I get the information that I needed? Yes, I did.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and keeping in mind, even kind of knowing that we all are very different. We all fall into different traps. That person has their own style, their own level of their personality, we're just different creatures, all of us. And so even kind of taking you out of that equation and just some self-compassion for that other person, a more helpful way to see this is, that's just kind of, this person isn't a warm fuzzy person, but it doesn't mean I can't figure out how to work with that personality. Thank you, that's really helpful to share. Anyone else have anything to share as well?
But isn't that kind of like a mind trap? If you're saying, oh, okay, yeah, that person's not warm and fuzzy, but you haven't had a discussion with that person. Just dig a little bit more into who they are as a person.
Sure,
You know what I
so the more helpful, Absolutely, that, layer on top of that, the brain is complex. And so, that is correct, you are assuming it from limited knowledge. A more helpful way to see this is, it appears from what I'm seeing in this email exchange, that this person was not what we talked to. And maybe as I get to know this person, that might change as well. Maybe they're busy and this was just a quick send off, and which is also the way I think what you say, they're busy, this person's busy. So yes, we might be layering another trap on it, but the key is that we're feeling better, that we're not feeling stuck and narrowed and like this is never gonna get through it. The more quickly we can bounce back to like flexible and curious and open, the quicker we're gonna get there. And that's one of the things I often recommend just in general, and somehow every talk I do, somehow comes back to the emotion of curiosity. So when we're really stuck and narrowed and any of these things that you're going through and that you've been writing down, we kind of get in these very narrow spaces, and sometimes we do feel helpless, hopeless, sad, angry, shame if it's about us, in the B trap. One way you can't just go from shame to just happiness, and you can't just like jump up the spectrum, but an emotion that we can all tap into is curiosity. Curiosity is kind of this mid-level emotion where, interesting, where it opens us a little bit. We're not just like, it's never gonna work, or whatever expletive is coming out of us, or, curiosity is a great gateway to something else. And so even getting curious, like, interesting, a more helpful way to see this is, I don't really know her. And maybe if I got a little curious around this situation, how can I work with her better? Curiosity is also a really good gateway. So that's another little tool you can put in your pocket, is when you're feeling really stuck or in a hard way, to get curious with it and just try to open yourself up. Anything else coming up for anyone around any of this?
Just share with you that try to balance on campus back in the spring. And thinking that, it's kind of a big deal when you tell everybody that it's shelter in place.
Yeah.
And I think I'm overreacting, and going through this, I think, I still don't think you're overreacting. And then, when 200 people are in comments waiting, you're like, oh, God, I'm probably thinking, who's the idiot running this operation? But, as it turns out, people are okay, no one got hurt. But, I have those, I'm thinking those mind reading, they know what I'm thinking, I know what they're thinking,
Yes.
and then say to myself, of course that's not true. Of course they want me to do something.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to feel safe.
Yeah.
Everyone, people know this is not overreacting, this is the state of the world.
Correct. And as it turns out, no one criticized me for the shelter in place, because it's the way the world is today,
Yeah.
and they want to be safe.
Sure.
So you're right.
Absolutely. But it's so easy. You ever gotten a review and the review said all this great things, but then at the end it said, and blah, 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 blah. Like
Right.
one little thing.
Yeah,
Like
you
that-
couldn't have donuts.
We love, couldn't have donuts. Lots of.
Yes.
But any of those, that's what we hold on to, it's just that little piece. And so, same thing, it's like you can do the best job out there, keeping everybody safe. Just gonna hold on to this one thought of like, and then come think I'm blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so very, very human.
Mhm.
Very human of you. Did you have someone over here?
Oh, well, what if it turns out that what you're thinking about is true? It is the worst case. So there's the managing of that.
Yeah.
Doing that, and for me, curiosity about how to fix that.
Yeah.
Is hugely important, because you have to put it out here and say, okay, this really happened, what do I do about it? How do I, figure it out? Because sometimes what you think it does.
100%, sometimes it is, and I actually teach a strategy called best case, worst case, most likely. And so we go way down the rabbit hole of what we think the worst case is. Then we ricochet to that crazy best case, because we never think about it, right? I'm saying how we never think about the best things that can happen. But try to ground in the most likely of, okay, this is most likely what's going to happen. And then making a plan based on that. So given this is what I think is the most likely thing to happen, I will tell you every time I've done that exercise, it's much closer to the best case that usually happens, but sometimes, yes, the worst case is going to happen. If you want your contingency plan to be about that, like, hey, this could happen, someone could be really hurt, someone could blah, 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 whatever it is. if that happens, I will do this then. But it buys us some space between it. It's like not living in what we think is going to be that. And we know, again, even the hardest things that we've all gone through, grief, loss. It's not that we're not still grieving. It's that, but we still get up every day and we make it through the next version of that grief. We built, I heard a good analogy the other day around, it's like if you go to the gym and at first lifting that 10 pounds is really hard. When we lose someone, of course, it's devastating. It's always gonna be devastating, but we get used to lift, like that 10 pounds is always gonna be 10 pounds. But the more you go to the gym, the easier it is to carry that 10 pounds. With grief, it's always gonna be that pain and that loss, but we get used to carrying it. And it becomes maybe different, maybe not easier, but different to carry it. And so we will get through everything that happens to us, even if it's the worst, and making a plan for that as well, if we need to give us a little space. Like my mother always says, don't borrow trouble, which is a very old fashioned thing to say, but it's so true. It's like we're going to suffer twice. So we maybe have, and the idea that maybe we'll have to suffer eventually. I don't want to suffer right now, even if, do I have to suffer both times, and maybe I don't have to suffer at all. Maybe it's not going to happen. So just trying to be more conscious about our thoughts, trying to, work with them, be aware of them, catch them. A lot of times it's like, oh, there I go again, doing that thing I do. Like that's what I say all the time. There I go again, catastrophizing about a health thing, or there I go again, thinking I know what someone else is thinking. The more we practice this, and something like just kind of tying my narrative together. I find out the adversities, I find out my children have to go to distance learning. I catch counterproductive thoughts, like I'm never going to be able to handle that, and replace it with confidence. That's not true because I've handled everything and I will continue to do so. And we can do this in a moment, but we can also start to kind of preemptively like, oh, this is the kind of situation where I usually go into that mind reading, or oh, this is the kind of situation where normally I start to catastrophize. And the more we know that ahead of time, the more we can even start to work with our thoughts before the challenge, or when we know it's going to be challenging. So in the short term, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, that game where the things are coming up and you're hitting them, like, oh, not that counterproductive, not that one. But in the long term, start to have a fundamental change in your structure and your beliefs. When we know, like, oh yeah, we start to catch it preemptively, or we stop having those kind of thoughts because we've worked with them so often that we know they don't serve us and that we don't need them and they're not helpful. And it changes our belief system. So anyways, in the practice as you move forward into your day-to-day, just start to catch yourself. Even just that alone is powerful. The word aware, the root is where, so it means tool. Software, we have software, we have underwear, we have silverware. Aware means a tool. So even just being aware that we think this way, we have these traps is powerful. Especially, I think one of the easiest ways is when you have these big global words like I'm never, or this always, or I've always, or I'm never going to. Some of these big thoughts generally are accurate, they're not serving. So start to catch some of those words, and sometimes it's an easy way to think about it. And then see if you can pull one of these things out, If this happens, I'm gonna do Y. If X happens, I'll do Y. That's not, another way to see this is, or that's just really not true. You're gonna start to notice how many of your thoughts are kind of this catastrophized worst case scenario, or mind reading is never true. Maybe when we find out and talk to them, maybe it somewhat matches up, but the idea that we think we know, that the notion is not true. We don't know what it is. Never. I know nothing about it. Maybe that it's almost time to go, and you're like, oh, where do I have to be in 2 minutes? Other than that, I don't know what anyone is thinking. That is true, but I don't know what they're thinking. I always have a suggested reading. Karen Rivich wrote a book called The Resilience Factors, 7 keys on your inner strengths and overcoming life's hurdles. She has more strategies that you can learn there for building resilience. So if you're working with athletes or teams or students, this is another great resource. Check out her work at UPenn. There's tons and tons of strategies for building resilience. And feel free to stay connected with me. I'm on LinkedIn, JJ Weisberg. I have a couple of Instagrams and Facebooks for my consulting coaching practice, as well as my new place is called Northbound Line and Bottom Shop. If you're in Sarasota, in the east side, come visit me. I do all sorts of different things there. Have some cool products for meditation, mindfulness, journaling, stuff on the physical body, a T-bar, nonfiction center. So stay connected if you'd like to. So my information's on the page as well. And I always leave a little spot at the end of anything I do that says aha. So if there's like a little nugget that you want to write down so that you remember. And maybe there's a small commitment. Just take an hour to listen to someone talk. Maybe there's a little something you can move to that, like, hey, I'm just gonna be more conscious of my thoughts as I move forward and try to work with them a little different. So I'll stay for any questions or if anyone online had any questions, but thank you so much for checking out today's talk. I'll be back in November. I don't think we picked-
October.
or- yeah, so October.
Yeah.
And I don't think we picked a topic yet, but.
No.
You will have some, check the calendar, you'll get an email. And another topic is positive psychology, so we do things around habits and goals, around mindset, and beliefs, flow, state, working with worry, I don't know, a ton of talk about, so hope this gave you a little nugget to walk away with, and I thank you all, and hope you enjoy your lunch. And a big step.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you for all your online expertise over here, and, yeah, so thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And I'll-
Plenty of extra food too, so feel free to take an extra sandwich, bag of chips, fruit, all that stuff.
Yeah.